Thanks for listening to the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, here to help educate, motivate, and put you on the right path to take control of your health through weekly discussions on topics in the medical field, public health arena, and in your community. And now your host, Dr. Barry.
Hello, Lunch and Learn community. Dr. Bayer here, your host, bringing you episode 65 of the podcast. And this week I am asking a question really to all of my practitioners and my physician listeners out there and healthcare providers. When was the first time you decided, you know what, I want to serve the community, I want to serve my patient, and I want to help heal the world, right? We all have these very lofty goals, right, of what we want to do when we become a physician. And for a lot of us, it may start very early. It may start when we're in elementary school, medical school. It may start when we're in middle school. It may start when we're pre-med. Like, there's different ranges of when that, that goal of wanting to serve someone starts, right? But it happens for everyone, right? Now, I'll be honest, for a lot of people, after you get to medical school and you become a physician, that feeling may go away, right? But that's a whole different podcast discussion. This week, I'm just asking, and I want to kind of give my story, right, on when I decided to say, you know what, I'm ready to serve my community. And for a lot of people, you may, especially if you have been keeping up with me, I've wanted to be a physician all my life. But it wasn't really until I got to medical school, right, that I said, you know what, this is it, right? Like, I cannot believe I get to do this for a living. I cannot believe people are going to pay me to do something that I would do day in, night out for free, right? So stay tuned for another amazing episode where we go into a little bit of the backstory of Dr. Barry, where we learn where Dr. Barry was when he decided he was ready to serve the whole world and how Dr. Barry was going to do that, right? And like always, if you want my show notes, head over to drpiersblog.com/LLP 065 or lunchlearnpod.com and you'll get all of the episodes this week. Alright, so every week I pose a question where I ask myself, what am I going to talk about this week, right? Like, what am I going to do to help and empower the Lunch and Learn community? Because I've been going back and forth to conferences, one spectrum, it's how to better myself, better brand myself, better help monetize myself. And then the other is, how can you help the residents, right? Like, what can you do to help make better residents and better physicians for the community? And I'm stuck like in this middle process, right? Where I'm a teacher, right? I'm a teacher and my goal is to create, and actually my job, right, is to make the best new crop of physicians out there. And on the other side, right, like, I am a physician who understands in this landscape and age, if you don't do what you need to do to serve yourself, right, then there's no way you can serve your greater community. So it kind of like brought me back and said, you know what, I'm serving kind of this population here, I'm serving this population here, but when did all of this serving start, right? And I've asked plenty of my colleagues and my friends in this industry, when did you say, you know what, being a physician is what I want to do, right, for the rest of my life? And, despite what's been happening now with all of the bureaucracy and the political changes and everything that makes a physician's job extremely hard and extremely less pleasurable than it used to be, right? Like, what is it that still causes you to say, you know what, I got to get up out of bed? Obviously besides, Sally Mae and Navient. And for me, right, I think for me, when I said, you know what, I want to be a physician, right, it started very early. I was in elementary school, and the only real contact I had with a physician, right, was my pediatrician, right, which for a lot of us is usually our first contact, right? And there's a pediatrician in our community, Dr. Gaston, either Pierre Gaston Pierre, one of those two. He was the community physician for all of the Haitians in South Florida, right, Lake Worth to be exact. For a lot of us, right, like, everyone went to Dr. Gaston, right? Like, everyone knew if you had an appointment, you were going to see Dr. Gaston, right? Because he had built such a community and such a level of trust within the Haitian community growing up, right? Like, it it was almost weird if you stayed in Lake Worth and you didn't see Dr. Gaston. And I knew right then and there, like that's what I wanted to do, right? Like I wanted to be Dr. Gaston. I wanted to be the community physician. I wanted to be the person that everyone came to see when they were growing up and they knew about and they talked about years on years down the line, right? And that's what sparked the goal, right? Like that's what turned it on to say, you know what? That's it, right? Like I want to be like that guy right there. Before I knew it, right? Like everyone was calling me Dr. Barry, right? Everyone was calling me Dr. Pierre. In elementary school, middle school, and high school, right? It was Dr. Pierre, Dr. Pierre, Dr. Pierre, right? So I really didn't know any other way, right? And I'm being honest, right? I didn't have a plan B when it came to this career thing, right? Because like all I could see and think and dream about was becoming a physician one day, right? Didn't know what type, right? I'll be honest. When I grew up, I wanted to be like a pediatric surgeon. And don't ask me why, because honestly, to this day, I don't actually remember what spirited me to be a pediatric surgeon. But for some reason, I must have saw it on TV and it sounded real cool. And I used to tell people I'm going to be a pediatric surgeon. I'm going to be the best pediatric surgeon that I know, right? And that was going to be my goal, right? I was going to be a pediatric surgeon. And as I was moving along in middle school and moving along in high school, I was in the pre-magnet program at that time, right? The medical magnet. And it's funny, side note, right? When I was in medical magnet, I did first responder. So I was a first responder riding, in the back of the ambulances. For those who don't know what a first responder is, very interesting, very cool. But I still knew I wanted to be a physician, and I remember vividly, right? Like, and I think it's crazy how the stuff you remember. Right? I remember vividly. I was either a junior or a senior in high school, right? And my advisor, right at the time, medical magnet advisor at the time said, "You know what? I don't think being a physician is in your cards, right? I don't see you as a physician, right?" And of course, right, as a high school kid, you're kind of taken aback, right? Because again, this is a person who, was supposed to be my career counselor to get me to medical school, right? Because again, at the time, I had no clue even how to get to medical school. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this person was telling me I wasn't even going to be a physician, right? And this was the first time I heard it, right? Because again, remember I tell you, growing up, everyone called me Dr. Pierre, right? So I just assumed, right? Again, I was naive. I just assumed that it was going to happen. And here goes a person who I just assume has to be the expert, right? Because they are in the medical magnet, they are in the career counseling field, right? And this person telling me they don't see me being a physician in my cards, right? And then I go to work, right? At the time, I used to work at Publix, right? And I remember one of the managers at Publix saying, "Yeah, you know what? I don't think he's going to be a doctor. Right? I know that's what he's going for, but I don't think it's going to happen for him," right? Like, again, so it was, and this happened in like a span of like 2 weeks. So all of a sudden, in a 2 week span, people were there to try to crush the dream, right? Like the dream crushers were there, right? And for those who have embarked on this path of medicine or whatever field you've likely embarked on this path, you've likely ran into a couple of dream crushers out there, right? So I ran into my dream crushers pretty early when I was in high school, right? But I didn't let that deter me because I knew and I didn't know any better, right? Because again, I was naive. I knew I was going to be a physician, right? I was going to be Dr. Gaston, right? I was going to be the pediatric surgeon, right? Again, I don't know why pediatric surgeon. Like even as I'm recording this, I'm trying to think, what was I thinking about being a pediatric surgeon, right? Especially now in this age where I realize how much I hate surgery. And it's not the surgery aspect of it or the blood, the guts or anything. I just hate sitting in a room for a long period of time, right, doing surgery, right? Like it's just me, right? I just knew when I was a medical student, surgery was not going to be in my cards. But I was in high school again, so I said, you know what, I'm not going to pay any mind to my guidance counselor. I'm still going to apply to schools, and I ended up going to the best school in the United States, Florida State University. I remember one day I was in the career counseling room. I remember one of the advisors saying, "Hey, are you interested in, going to medical school?" I'm like, "Oh, sure. Well, like, have you studied for the MCAT? Have you started looking at medical schools to apply to?" And I realized for the first time, right, again, I was an undergrad and I was a sophomore going to become a junior, right? I realized for the first time, I actually had no clue like how to get into medical school, right? Like I just assumed that at the end of the tunnel, I get good grades, and then I would just pop up into somebody's medical school, right? It's right then and there that I got that harsh reality that I was gonna have to put some extra work in to get the job done. When I started out at Florida State, I was with a huge class of people who wanted to be pre-med. As I moved along my time at Florida State, all of those people who wanted to be pre-med, got picked off one way or the other, whether it was due to anatomy physiology, whether it was due to organic chemistry or Chem 2 or Biochem 1. Like classes were just picking a lot of my friends off and, causing them to deter in their goal and their aspirations of wanting to become a physician. But fortunately for me, of course, as we stand here, right? As we stand listening to it, right? Like I kept moving and I kept progressing. Was right then and there. I said, you know what? Like I'm not gonna let anything stop me, right? To be like Dr. Gaston again. Remember, he was that light at the end of the tunnel, right? Like again, and for those who know, I have not spoken to Dr. Gaston, and I'm still in South Florida, right? And I've not spoken to this physician since I was probably like 20 plus years now. Because again, he was my pediatrician, so I stopped seeing him when I was like 14, 15. Yeah, it's about 20 years. So, but still, like his legacy and the impact that he's had on me has been so great that I still remember him to this day. So that's why that's what I was shooting for, right? So nobody was gonna stop me from becoming the next Dr. Gaston because that's what I wanted, and I knew that feeling of being wanted, right? Like I remember going into his office and him giving a piece of candy, and him being able to listen to a couple of my symptoms and complaints and tell me exactly what's wrong with me, right? I thought it was magic. I said, oh my God, this guy is a magician. I told him I had this and that, and he told me exactly what was wrong, and he told me how to treat me, right? Again, it's just one of these things that as an impressionable child, you can't take for granted. And clearly I have it, right? Like he was that peak. He was that guiding light that says, you know what, this is why I got to do what I have to do. So there I am. I'm in undergrad, right? And I realized all of a sudden, hey, you got to do some volunteer work. You got to start doing some shadowing. You got to do a lot of these things that you should have been doing, but you've been kind of, because you didn't know, you didn't do it. So I got on the ball. I was volunteering everywhere. I was shadowing everywhere. I was transporting. I was doing all of these things. And the more I did, right, where there was volunteering at the health department, volunteering at the weekend clinics, right, like just kind of being immersed in the system, the more I fell in love with the act of becoming a physician, right, the act of becoming the next Dr. Gaston, right. And it was an amazing journey for me, right. And again, I hadn't even got to medical school yet, right? Like these were just things I was doing in preparation for it. But I never saw it as a hill to climb, right? I saw like, hey, if everyone who is a doctor now has had to go through what I gotta go through, like I'm ready to do it, right? Like give me all of the extra work. So I was fortunate, right? I was fortunate enough to get to medical school, right? And even that story is pretty funny. Because when I remember I'm in Tallahassee still. I'm still at Florida State, still volunteering and studying for MCAT and doing what you're supposed to do. And I remember passing by the FOMA building, right, Florida Osteopathic Medical Association building. And at the time, right, I didn't know what that meant, right. I was like, what is that? Like, what? All I saw was the words Medical Association, and I figured, hey, you know what? I need to go in there and see what it's looking like. So I go into this building, right? And I remember talking to the receptionist and asking, say, hey, I just passed this building. I'm a pre-medical student, interested in going to medical school, right? Can you tell me about a FOMA, right? What is FOMA, right? What is osteopathic medicine, right? And just that enlightenment that I was able to get from the receptionist, right? Again, I don't remember her name. I wish I did. That enlightenment that I was able to get, right? Really almost like turn that light on, because it said, hey, you know what, you want to be a physician, but now that you're like listening to what an osteopathic physician is and the philosophy behind being an osteopathic physician, right, like this is it, right? Like you want to help the people, right? You want to be that non-traditional person that says, you know what? I want to look at you in a holistic manner, and I don't want to look at you as just your disease, right? I want to look at you as a person who happens to be afflicted with your disease, right? And I still take this mantra today, right? Because again, I don't look at patients like a patient with diabetes, right? I look at like who's this patient here, right? Who is patient A, right? And how is diabetes affecting them, right? And that's how I've always been able to kind of manage my patient interaction, which is one of the reasons why my patient interaction is some of the best of my colleagues, right? Because like honestly, and I hate to say this, right? Like I actually care about my patients, right? Like I actually care about their well-being, and I don't see this as a job, right? I've never seen it as a job, even when I was studying late nights and getting less sleep and missing birthdays, missing holidays, because I knew what the end goal was. Like it never really bothered me to do so. So I was a junior, right? And I'm loving everything about medicine. I'm loving the volunteering, I'm loving the hard work, I'm loving the outlook, where I was gonna be when it was all said and done. But I still had this goal of getting into medical school, right? Like again, this was something that unfortunately was kind of new, right? I didn't realize all the stuff you had to do, honestly, right? I didn't realize you had to study for this test called the MCAT, right? Like I didn't realize that you actually had to apply to medical schools and you had to look to see what their prerequisites, because I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't have any mentors. I just knew I wanted to be in medical school. But fortunately, my career mentor, Miss Anderson, right? She was right then and there, right? She was the advisor for MAPS, the Multicultural Association for Pre-Health Students, which is a subsidiary of Student National Medical Association, aka the best student organization ever. Like, and again, I wish I was like being hyperbolous, but I don't know of another student organization that works as hard as Student National Medical Association. And I'll take that and argue with anyone about it. But besides the point, so getting with a lot of these like-minded kids who also wanted to get to medical school, also wanted to do well in school, also wanted to volunteer was such an amazing thing for me that even when I had my missteps, right? And my missteps, I'm talking about, I forget what semester that was, but it was a semester when I had genetics and organic chemistry and biochem. And let me tell you, when I tell you I crashed and burned that semester, right? It was such a terrible semester. I usually like erase it from my memory, right? It was such a terrible semester and grades wise, and didn't do well. And I figured, you know what? This is it. This is what they mean when they say the weed out courses, right? Like all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm not gonna be a doctor anymore. But then I remembered what it was like when I was in high school, and my career advisor told me she didn't see being a physician was in my cards. And then I remember my manager at Publix telling me that she didn't see being a physician was in my cards. And I just used those two as motivation. I said, nope, I'm not going to let them be correct, right? So I just picked up and kept walking, right? I said, this is an obstacle. This is an obstacle that a lot of our physicians tend to face, right? Even though we don't talk about it. But I'm going to make sure that I don't let this obstacle defeat me. And I didn't, right? So I got to medical school. And really, I hate this. I want to say it was 100% by the marriage, but I don't know, right? Because when I talked earlier about, getting in touch with FOMA, right? Like I met my advisor and preceptor, right? Dr. Dacker, right? He was, at the time I didn't know it, right? But he was an osteopathic physician in the area. And he was a part of the Florida Osteopathic Medical Association. And I remember him telling me, like, hey, have you applied to Nova for medical school, right? I said, no, I didn't. So I applied to Nova. I didn't realize Nova was in South Florida. At that time, I realized very quickly, being in Tallahassee, that I did not like the weather in Tallahassee. I did not like being cold whatsoever. And I applied, and like 2 weeks later, I got an interview, and like 2 weeks later, I was in medical school, right? Like, whoa, like this is happening, right? Like 4 more years, and it's definitely gonna be Dr. Barry, right? Like how like the countdown was officially on. When I was middle school, it was like, hey, you're gonna be Dr. Pierre. Hey, you're gonna be Dr. Pierre. When I was in high school, you're gonna be Dr. Pierre. But now, like, I'm in medical school, and it's, yo, really, you're about to be Dr. Pierre, right? Like, craziness, right? But the goal was always the same, right? Because again, I wanted to be Dr. Gaston, right? I wanted to help my community out. I wanted to help my patients out. I wanted to be the one that people came to when they needed assistance, right? So I took that reins on, and I still continue doing exactly what I was doing in undergrad, right? I was volunteering. I was being part of much more organizations. Again, Student National Medical Association being one of the primary ones, and we were just going in and putting in work. And I know we were putting in work because all of the other organizations like took heed, right? Like they knew that if their event wasn't as good as our event, there was no point to do an event, right? Like they knew if they weren't going to have the enthusiasm to serve and help the community, there was no point to do it, right? Because SNMA, Student National Medical Association, was going to show them up every which way. So it was definitely such an enriching experience, right? Because I knew even as I moved along and became a first year and a second year medical student, a third year, that the serving aspect of it was always the most important thing for me, right? Like it actually, unfortunately, kind of ruined me, right, to do ER. And for those who know, ER is more of a very fast-paced, get in, get out type of thing. But I was the worst one in ER, right? Because I was always asked, well, hey, like, how's home? Like, I always would want to know more about my patient, and just knowing the little itsy bitsy facts just to get them either inside the hospital admitted or outside a hospital discharge wasn't enough for me, right? So I knew right then and there ER definitely wasn't going to be in my cup of steez. But it's definitely been something, right? Like this feeling of serving the community, right? This feeling of serving the patient in front of you, right? This feeling of serving my residents, right? It's definitely, and then honestly, at the end, this feeling of wanting to serve myself, right? It's always been a primary goal, right? It's always been a primary mission of mine to help facilitate and make it easier to make it possible, right? To again, quote, obviously empower yourself, right, for better health, right? Like again, that's not just a mantra, right? Like I think that's a way of life, right? Like again, I've always worked to empower my community and get my community where they need to get to, right? And that's why, with this Lunch and Learn community and a podcast and a blog and the live streams, that's just always going to be my goal, right? Again, I've had colleagues ask me, right, like, hey, like, how long do you plan on doing this? The answer is likely forever, right? Like, I don't see a necessary reason to stop doing it, right? Like, it's one of the reasons that once I changed jobs, I still was doing exactly what I wanted to do and exactly how I was doing it, right? Because I wasn't necessarily doing it because it benefited me on an outpatient basis, even though it definitely did. I was doing it because I genuinely love the fact that I was able to help someone that I may not be able to physically touch, right? I may not be able to physically hold, right? I may not be able to physically see eye to eye, right? But if I turn on the phone camera, right, and go to live, or if I record a podcast and I press submit and it sends out to everywhere it sends out, I can like still help and reach out and say, here, this is what you need to get yourself back in order. This is what you need to help, get you off yourself off those medications. This is what you need, right, to help make you the healthier you. So that being said, I think I'm really going to be spending some more time, especially with the Lunch Learning community, bringing you other professionals and asking the question, when did they decide that serving you guys, right, serving the community, right, serving their patients, serving themselves was the thing for them to do, right? Because I can tell you in medicine, it's probably one of the most rewarding aspects of it, right? Like, yes, the money's great, I guess. Minus your student loans, right? Money's great. The prestige somewhat is still good, right? It still holds a little weight, right? Like it still holds some weight to be a physician, right? But at the end of the day, right, it's the serving, right, like that gets everybody up out of bed at 4 in the morning to go see that patient or answer that phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? It's because our drive to serve will always overpower everything else. Like always, I'm going to see you guys next week. Again, head over to drpierresblog.com for today's show notes. See you next week. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. Please head over to lunchlearnpod.com where you'll get the most recent episodes as well as today's show notes for your listening and viewing pleasure. And like always, depending on where you're listening this to, please subscribe to the podcast so you can get all the latest episodes sent directly to you. And we are at all of your favorite podcast listening stations, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen and empower yourself to take control of your health, and we'll see you next week.